Good morning. Please stand and remove your hats for the Singing of O Canada by Nadia Sinclair.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, and all of us commend. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you. Please be seated. My name is Tracy Xie, and my co-MC for today's service is Haley Miller. In the darkest of times, Canada has always been a beacon of light and freedom. When the world needed our help, Canadian men and women answered, laying down their lives for the rights and freedoms of future generations. From the devastating, disease-ridden trenches in World War I to the repeated horrors in World War II, to the harsh valleys and rains of Korea, to the blistering heat in Afghanistan. When the world called for aid, Canadian soldiers, doctors, and nurses all shouldered their share of responsibility.
Lest we forget. These are 3 words that should be easy to remember. These are 3 words that remind us to remember. The purpose of today's ceremony is to unite us as a school community to honor the Canadians who served our country and who made the ultimate sacrifice at war. Today, we remind ourselves that we should never forget their sacrifices. Our act of remembrance will be read by Miss Laura Ozimick, a first-generation Canadian-Polish immigrant whose family was displaced after the Second World War. Her grandfathers were veterans of the First World War, and her father was a veteran of the Second World War. Miss Ozimick retired as an engineer with the Department of National Defense and as a Dame in the Order of St. George. Her spouse is retired Lieutenant Commander Victor Chen. Lieutenant Commander Chen served within the Royal Canadian Navy for 35 years, mainly during the years of the Cold War and the unrest in the Balkans in the Middle East. He is a 15-year member of the Royal Canadian Legion.
They shall not grow old as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Remembrance Day is officially recognized on the 11th of November in many countries around the world. This Memorial Day has been observed since the year 1919, just after the hostilities of World War I ended, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. On this day, we remember and honor the member of armed forces who have died in the line of duty while serving our country at war. As the nature of war and Canada's military purposes have changed over time, we have included those serving in peacekeeping missions and those serving ceremonial positions, such as Corporal Nathan Cirillo, who died while serving sentry duty at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier here in Ottawa in 2014.
Today, we will remember the sacrifices made by our fellow Canadians for our freedoms. Too often, we forget our history. Over time, lest we forget can simply become the wording on a war memorial, and not a call to each and every one of us to remember. Today, we encourage fellow youth to recall the sacrifices made before them, to recognize that Remembrance Day is our time to remember.
We are also united today as we reflect upon how we are connected to Remembrance Day as a school community. Some of us have family members who have served for our country. Some of our school community will one day serve for our country. And all of us in our school community are connected through our school namesake, John McCrae, whose poem In Flanders Fields was penned over 100 years ago during World War I. The poppies that John McCrae saw blooming across some of the worst battlefields of Flanders are what inspired his poem and what has become the symbol of Remembrance Day. This morning, our grade 12 students continued our school's tradition involving the John McCrae graduating class, who each placed a handmade ceramic poppy around our war monument to show how we are connected to Remembrance Day.
Our tradition was inspired by the 2014 art installation called Blood-Swept Lands and Seas of Red at the Tower of London. Here, over 800,000 ceramic poppies filled the tower's moat. The poppies represented every British military fatality from World War I. Today, every time we see a poppy, it helps us to remember those who lost their lives in the line of duty. Today's service provides us with time to reflect upon how we are all connected to Remembrance Day, lest we forget.
We will now listen to Chopin's Prelude in E minor, played on the piano by Kevin Huang. As Kevin plays, we will see graduating grade 12 students who pinned poppies yesterday in remembrance of those Canadians who paid the ultimate sacrifice during World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Afghanistan conflict, and Canadian peacekeeping missions.
"70 days in the front lines, 30 days in support trenches, 120 days on reserve, 70 days at rest, and 2 weeks on leave. This was the life of a soldier in World War I. The Great War marked our coming of age as a nation. We were a self-governing dominion of the British Empire in 1914, so when Britain declared war, we were automatically at war. When the war ended in 1918, our war contributions led to Canadians experiencing a greater sense of national pride and identity. Many of our young men voluntarily enlisted, looking for adventure and wanting to do their duty for their country. Home by Christmas was the rallying cry. What they faced instead was the horrors of trench warfare and not knowing if they would ever make it home alive. Many made it back home, but the transition back to regular life was difficult. Many more, however, did not make it home. We remember them for their sacrifices.
Between 1939 and 1945, over 1 million soldiers, comprising 40% of the male population in Canada, enlisted in the Canadian Forces. Nearly all of these people were volunteers. Over 45,000 of these Canadians never returned home. Several families lost more than one family member to the battles of World War II. We remember them.
Just 5 years after the Second World War had ended, soldiers from North Korea crossed the 38th parallel and began the Korean War. From 1950 to 1953, Canadian soldiers fought in the valleys, in the hilltops, in the monsoon rains, and in the summer heat. By the time it was over, more than 25,000 Canadians had served on the Korean Peninsula and spent time away from their home. The Korean War is often known as the Forgotten War, but not here at John McCrae. We remember them.
War is a part of Canada's past, as well as a part of Canada's present. Between 2001 and 2014, more than 40,000 Canadian Armed Forces members have served in a military capacity in Afghanistan. 1 out of every 62 Canadian soldiers did not return from their mission. Due to medical advancements, many of the soldiers who were injured will survive, but they will live the rest of their lives with their injuries from combat. In addition, many of their soldiers have to live with the psychological effects brought on by combat.
As we remember their sacrifices, we will continue the time-honored tradition of laying wreaths, one for those who valiantly lost their lives in the line of duty, and another for the honorable men and women who are currently serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. The first wreath will be laid by our principal, Miss Erin O'Grady, alongside our co-presidents, Naomi Kapoor and Andy Zhang. The second wreath will be laid by Miss Laura Ozimek, as well as my co-MC, Tracy Xie, as well as myself.
We will now have the playing of The Last Post by Mr. Sheridan. It will be followed with 2 minutes of silence, the lament, and the reveille. As a sign of respect for today's ceremony, please remove your hats and stand.
Lest we forget, please be seated. Lest we forget the most recent sacrifices our fellow Canadians have made in the conflict in Afghanistan, as well as the many past sacrifices, such as the Korean War, World War II, and World War I. However, we must remember that Canadian soldiers are still serving for our country. We must recognize their hardships as they continue to fight for the freedoms for people around the world.
Dr. John McCrae, for whom our school is named, was appointed second in command of the 1st Brigade, Canadian Field Artillery, as a field surgeon when Canada joined the war against Germany on August 4, 1914. He treated the wounded during the Second Battle of Ypres from a hastily dug 8-foot by 8-foot bunker. During this battle, his friend and former student, Alexis Helmer, was shot and killed. We will now see into his mind on this day through a monologue as he contemplates the death of his friend.
I am surrounded by the dead and dying every day, sorrowfully growing accustomed to gruesome sights and nightmares. I have witnessed torn limbs, maimed and decaying bodies, and men coated in the blood of companions and foes alike. I have amputated, operated, sewed, and comforted. I am not prepared for what I have witnessed and for what I have done in the name of saving lives. The continuous eerie of pounding gunfire and rifle fire echoed within the distance of the bleak wasteland cloaked in darkness. Thick sheets of rain screened the German shell. It remained undetected until it was too late. In an instant, he was gone. My former pupil, my friend, Alex. A split second is all it took.
Later that day, John McCrae was still trying to come to terms with the death of his friend.
I have always been convinced of the need to fight for our great nation. Nevertheless, at what cost? How are we to honor those who died? Crosses mark grave sites as symbols to heal the pain, while reminding survivors of what is lost. Is this sufficient? How else can we remember? Countless men, women, and children have died and will die. So many lost lives, like so many poppies swaying in the spoiled earth of the battlefields and cemeteries. Nevertheless, death chose you. I will not allow you to die in vain, or to die without being remembered. As you pass on the duty to continue to fight, I will commemorate you, friend, comrade, and brother.
The day after presiding over the funeral and burial of his friend, Lieutenant Alexis Helmer, John McCrae was inspired to write the poem In Flanders Fields on a scrap of paper while sitting on the back of a medical field ambulance. Dissatisfied with his work, McCrae tossed the poem aside. Meanwhile, a young sergeant major named Cyril Allinson watched John McCrae write the poem. After picking up the discarded poem, Allinson was amazed that the poem captured the exact scene on that day in early May 1915. Unbeknownst to McCrae, Allinson sent it to newspapers in England. The poem was rejected by one publisher, but was later accepted by another and published on December 8, 1915. It has since become one of the most significant war poems ever written. On January 28, 1918, John McCrae died of pneumonia complicated by meningitis. He never made it back to Canada.
We will now hear the poem In Flanders Field, read by John McCrae graduates from 2012, Amy Lamb, Sean Richardson, and Amber Cuff, accompanied by Michael Lim.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below.
We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved, and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields.
Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
The voice of John McCrae continues to live on as we hear his poem recited or as we read the words on our monument. His legacy is what connects us to Remembrance Day, as do the poppies on our clothes and the ceramic poppies in front of our war monument. Today, we want to honor and remember all 600,000 Canadians who have given their lives for our country and our freedom.
This concludes our Remembrance Day service for this morning. As Noah Grew on the bagpipes plays us out, and you continue on with the rest of your day, we would like to ask you to think about the following. Remember, the thousands of Canadian men and women who risked their lives and made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. Remember, the Canadian men and women who continue to put their lives on the line. And remember that we are all connected to Remembrance Day, lest we forget. Thank you.